Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
An exclusive report by the former Labour leader Ed Miliband, who investigates the rent-to-own industry for this programme. Rent-to-own companies allow shoppers to pay for items like TVs, games consoles, fridges and washing machines in weekly instalments, spread over years with interest. But consumers can end up paying up to 3 times more for the product. And we've discovered that some companies are selling these goods to vulnerable people with mental health problems and learning difficulties, leading to concerns that they may not understand what they're signing up for. The Citizens Advice Bureau tells us it receives thousands of complaints a month about the sector, and the regulator must do more to protect consumers, they say. In this exclusive report, Ed Miliband tells us he wants rent-to-own companies to be regulated like payday loan firms, which since 2015 have had to cap the interest, fees and overall cost of a loan. The former Labour leader has campaigned against rent-to-own firms, and he's tried to persuade people to use credit unions instead. The biggest company in the sector is called Bright House. We asked them to take part in our report, but they declined. Here it is.
With so much choice on the high street, we're told the customer is king. But around 5 million people in the UK can't get credit. Lots of people can't borrow money to buy household goods, like a TV or cooker. And I'm seeing more and more people turning to rent-to-own shops, like Perfect Home, or Bright House, the largest company in the sector. People can get a TV on the spot and pay for it by weekly instalments, but it can be incredibly expensive. My constituents have told me they can end up paying 3 times as much, and if they miss a payment or are late, the costs spiral, or worse, they lose their TV along with their money.
As leader of the Labour Party and now as a backbench MP, I've talked about the need for firms to do right by their customers and play by the rules. Now, Bright House have 300 stores across the country, often in the poorest areas. One of them is in Doncaster, in my constituency. And I want to find out what kind of service they're really providing.
I'm concerned that Bright House are taking advantage of people on benefits and working on low incomes. But in the course of our investigation, I've been really shocked to find that Bright House are selling to people with mental health problems and learning disabilities.
He suffers with mental health problems, severe mental health problems.
Craig is 38, has autism and cerebral palsy. His mum Betty says her son didn't understand the Bright House contract. She spoke to us on his behalf.
He'll pay, but then he's got nothing for himself, for food and electric, gas, things like that. That's the sort of thing he does. So he is quite an handful.
Just tell us a bit about what experience you've had at Bright House.
Craig apparently had been in and bought this machine where you play games. I kept seeing it in house and I didn't really twig. And then I said, where did you go? I said, how much are you paying for that? He said, £50, but it's 46
A month?
A month, yeah. I said, where's it from? He said, Bright House. I said, oh my God. How many times have I said, don't touch him with a barge pole?
Do you think it would have been obvious to the Bright House staff that Craig had learning difficulties?
Yes, I do.
And what was the reaction of Bright House when you complained, both in the shop and when you wrote to them?
He just said, well, we've been through this. That's one young man at the shop. He said, we go through this thing and to make sure they know what they're getting. I said, well, that's no good to Craig.
Although Betty believes Bright House should have realised her son was vulnerable, she does say they stopped taking payments from Craig's account as soon as she told them about his situation and the console was returned. Bright House dispute Betty's claim that it would have been obvious Craig had learning difficulties and say a member of staff judged Craig to be capable of making his own decisions and had no reason to believe he wasn't aware of what he was doing. The Financial Conduct Authority, the body that regulates the rent-to-own sector, told us if companies have reason to believe that a customer has a learning disability, they must take reasonable steps to assist the customer to make an informed decision. If they believe the customer isn't able to understand the nature of the agreement, then the firm needs to make an assessment about whether it is appropriate to lend. But I don't think that's clear enough, and the guidelines need to be stricter. Paul, not his real name, is another vulnerable adult. He asked us to hide his identity. He has learning difficulties and mental health problems. You've told me that you've got some mental health issues.
Yeah.
You've got issues like epilepsy,
Yeah.
and you describe yourself as quite vulnerable. What kind of income have you got? And
It's I get 237 on SBA or something, and disability 170 a month.
right,
It doesn't seem a lot, does it?
you're a customer of Bright House.
Yeah.
aren't you? And do you want to just tell me what on the receipt, sort of what you're owing to them and what goods you've got with them?
That's that.
It's a sofa.
Yeah. Yeah, that's that.
Yeah.
Four.
So you've got sofa,
Sofa,
Telly.
CD.
CD, and you're paying what, about £20 a week to them. How have you ended up with that number of items? Do you think is it? How, you must have started off with one.
I think I
maybe.
must have started paying off one. I don't know how it worked, really. I don't know. It's
When you go into the Bright House store, what have you said to them about your own finances, and what have they said to you?
They just said it's a nice income. I said, well, it is, but I've got other things to pay. Well, you can have what you want at other stores.
Does the whole situation with Bright House cause you anxiety?
It does you a little bit, yeah.
It's a cold day, isn't it?
Bright House denies exploiting consumers in vulnerable circumstances or selling items to people who clearly cannot afford them, and says they have sufficient policies and procedures in place to prevent these practices from happening.
How are you doing? Nice to see you. Hello. Do you use Bright House?
We have done.
Have
never
you?
Again.
Really?
Never again. We got a laptop.
Yeah.
I think it were £300 laptop.
Yeah.
I paid a year's worth, just under a year's worth, at £13 a week.
Yeah.
And when I realised there were another year on it, so it took it up to like over 1,200 quid for a £300 laptop. It's unreal, isn't it?
But did they? Was it when you bought it? Was that clear to you that was what it was, or was it just not very?
It's all in small print and stuff like that, isn't it?
I think they're very fair.
Do you?
Yeah.
What kinds of things do you buy from them?
Settees, tellies,
Settees, tellies.
fridge freezers.
Yeah.
Staff's helpful in here as well, they help you.
Really?
If you're stuck, they will help you.
How long have you been a customer of them for?
3 years.
And you think it's fair? Did you get the service and the
You get
insurance?
everything you want, they're polite. If you can't pay, they will help you to sort out your difficulties.
The weekly payments at Bright House may seem cheap, but the total cost certainly isn't. Take a Beko washing machine. The product price is £358, but add in compulsory 5-star service. That includes delivery and installation of £55, and Service Plus, repair or replacement of your item, that costs £136. On top of that, interest rates of 69.9% a year, and payments spread over 3 years, you end up paying a grand total of £1,092.
This is the first item I got off Bright House.
Yeah.
It's got some screws under here. They
Yeah.
come loose. I don't even use it. I use it for my candles, but here and here should be another screw, a piece.
Bright House say they carry out affordability checks to make sure people can keep up with their weekly repayments.
Right.
But there's no screws.
Angela Jackson says Bright House should carry out much more thorough credit checks. She has a fridge freezer and a TV stand and has struggled with payments. And how much are you paying for this? In total?
About £200, I think, with insurance. I have to have it insured. Basically, if a kid chips it, I don't like that. It has to be.
So nobody went through your finances and said, is it affordable, can you afford it?
No, not with me. They just said basically that I could, because they just asked me what money I got. They didn't go through what I have to pay out, like bills situation, and obviously children are out like that. And then they just says, right, you can have such and such, you can have now I can have anything I want at the shop. Angela, and they were phoning me up as well, Angela, if you introduce somebody, we could give this, or we'd take some off your bill, £50 off your bill. So obviously you think, yeah, nice one, get my bill down a little bit. Because it's high, it's just constantly high, and it's a case of because it's there, and for people that haven't just got the money to just go and do it, they think, well, at least I can have the nice stuff still.
That's right.
Just a little bit more expensive, and it's there.
So you introduced your cousin, and what
Because
happened?
she was desperate for a dryer.
And what happened to her?
Well, she's ended up skinning herself, she's ended up doing without gas and electric.
And what's your advice to people who might be thinking...
Walk on by. That's what I'd say. In fact, I sing it outside if I see anybody going in there. No, I won't even go in it because when I walk in, I'm literally a minute. They'll say, do you want a receipt? I'll say, no, I'm going. And I just give them my money, give my name and my address, and I go before anyone comes and badgers me to see if I want out.
I wish I hadn't stayed there for so long.
I'm interested in what it looks like from the other side of the counter.
If I'd known earlier.
Zoe left her sales job at Bright House after 5 years to go and work for a rival.
From a personal point of view, you could obviously see that somebody couldn't afford the items that they wanted, but if the computer allowed them to add that onto their account, then that's what we would do.
Do you think it was clear to customers that in relation to the service agreement, they knew what they were buying?
I think because of the information that's given to a new customer joining Bright House, the amount that was read out to them, I think it was too much and they didn't quite understand what they were signing for.
So did you have experience of selling to people who'd been sold goods and then fell behind, couldn't afford them, got into big debt?
Yes, it happened a lot of times. People will see something for a small amount each week and that's the figure that they would look at. In reality, the amount that they're paying back and the length of time it would take to pay back was different. So people would say, maybe that's only £5 per week, I can afford that. That's only £10 per week. Before they know it, they're paying £100 a week. They're a single parent with children and it is unaffordable. Morally, I felt as though it was wrong. I had a few people who were behind on things, they'd got themselves into a mess from borrowing too much.
And did you have experience of people having goods that were faulty and then getting them repaired? And was that a good service?
I have had experience of goods going away for repair, coming back not repaired with the same fault still, or with an extra fault, or broken, or damaged, or even lost. Some customers would have their items sent away for repair and they would get lost and they'd have to get a replacement.
As part of their 5-star service, Bright House says it offers unlimited repairs, loan products when required, and replacements. I wanted to speak to Bright House, but they declined to be interviewed. So did the Consumer Credit Trade Association and the Finance and Leasing Association, the industry bodies of which Bright House is a member. But there are those who make the case that there's a gap in the market, and Perfect Home, Bright House and others provide an essential community service.
The fundamental question is whether or not we think these people should be able to opt into a contract where they pay more overall, but they have the appliances tomorrow, or whether or not they shouldn't have these appliances at all. It's an injustice to tell people at the bottom that because they're poor, they can't have things that in 2016 we would consider necessities.
Some of these companies are making very big profits at the expense of my constituents. How's that fair?
They're making huge profits because they're taking on a lot of risk. We see this with credit card companies as well. They're making marginal profits because they're loaning out to people with average credit scores. But these rent-to-own companies are often taking on people with no credit score. They don't always know if they're going to get their payments, so they're taking on a lot of risk there. They're getting these profits because they have to ensure down the line that they're going to get some kind of return. But in the meantime, people who wouldn't have these goods are getting them to their homes next day delivery.
The regulator, the Financial Conduct Authority, says companies must provide clear information to their customers and ensure fair treatment. I don't believe that's happening for many people who go to Bright House.
And Citizens Advice agree that there are real problems with the rent-to-own sector. They'd like the regulator, the FCA, to do more to ensure that the public are protected.
We're not suggesting that this whole market should be taken off the face of the planet altogether. However, we do see sharp practices. We do see people in vulnerable situations pushed into further difficulty, financial difficulty, and of course then emotional stress and worry due to the nature of the debt that they've taken on.
What do you mean by vulnerable?
Domestic violence cases, people who are disabled or with health conditions, and of course people who may have mental health conditions as well. And too often we think that the hire purchase firms offer them very little in terms of protection, don't do decent enough affordability checks, and therefore they get themselves into further difficulty.
From what I've seen, too often rent-to-own companies are taking advantage of people who have nowhere else to go. The regulator needs to stop the most vulnerable in our society being taken advantage of. Rent-to-own companies need to stop selling goods to people who just can't afford them. And I think there should be a cap on the total costs that rent-to-own companies can charge. It's been done with the payday lenders like Wonga, and it's worked.
Well, as you'd expect, we asked Bright House for an interview today. They declined and instead gave us this statement, which says, "We note that this feature is presented by an avowed critic who consistently misrepresents our business. Bright House serves those lower-income families who are excluded from mainstream credit. Rent to own is a very different proposition to other forms of retail. Our customers appreciate the ability to have quality products in their homes without the risk of unexpected bills and with the flexibility to return the product at any time and for any reason, owing nothing further. We undertake extensive affordability assessments before lending and seek to support all those customers who find themselves in difficulty." We will talk to the former Labour leader in the next hour of the programme. Thanks to you who've got in touch on this subject. David on Facebook says, "We need government to butt out of these areas. The free market will determine the price, not politicians." This tweet from Phil. "This is an issue that needs to be looked at. Well done, Ed." Alan on Facebook. "Why did Mr Miliband not do this when he had the chance to do so?" Simon has tweeted, "Rent to own. It's called free trade. Improve education in schools if people can't cope." Stephen says this, "The first time I've looked at Ed Miliband and thought, good man, kick on. Great idea." Christopher has emailed, "The treatment of vulnerable people in the UK is a national disgrace and shames Britain. I'm fed up with the weak being targeted in this way." Douglas says on email, "Why are you not mentioning credit unions, largely run by volunteers who provide a very worthwhile service to the community by offering affordable loans as well as encouraging saving?" And this texter says, "Ed Miliband has a new calling. Next, he'll be presenting Watchdog." We've got some messages here on social media from you, and this is about the rent-to-own sector, the rent-to-own companies. The former Labour leader, Ed Miliband, presented a report earlier highlighting his concerns that perhaps vulnerable people with mental health problems or learning difficulties were signing contracts for goods from rent-to-own firms that they didn't really understand. This tweet from Dave, "Well done for highlighting this." Julia tweets, "Well done, that was an important subject, excellently presented." Catherine has texted, "It's sad that people shop at companies like Bright House. However, a lot of people have no choice. People who are poor can't afford to save for a rainy day fund if the fridge or washing machine breaks down. They can't get a loan or afford to buy new, and even charity shops are too expensive now. So what choice is there?" This email from John, "I applaud Ed Miliband for his efforts to better regulate rent-to-own companies, but I do question his statement regarding the alleged success against payday loan firms like Wonga. There are still adverts from companies with interest rates in excess of 1,000% and even 1,200%. So how is this a success?" Damon, "Great stuff from Ed, highlighting the problem in the rent-to-own sector. His argument for a cap on the total cost Bright House and other firms can charge is compelling." Elias has tweeted, "Bright House and companies like them should really have more regulation to help protect the most vulnerable in society." And on Facebook, Jessica says this, "Victoria, I'm 24 and I have bipolar. Rent-to-own has cost me my job and my health. My bill is £68 per week. It's crippled me. And no one helps you if you can't afford your payments. There is a charge per item if you're late with your weekly payment. They are awful." Well, let's talk to Ed Miliband now, former leader of the Labour Party and MP for Doncaster North, and also to Ryan Bourne, who is head of public policy at the Institute of Economic Affairs. That is a think tank. Welcome, both of you. What is wrong with these shops providing this service to people who can't afford to pay for things up front with cash or who don't qualify for a credit card?
Because the costs are exorbitant, often 3 times the price you'd pay on the high street, because they are selling without clear information to people about what they're buying, because they're selling to people who can't afford to buy, and they're bundling together all kinds of things, including this so-called 5-star service, which you have no option but to pay for if you're buying the good. So there's a whole host of things wrong with this sector, Victoria, and in the end, I think it isn't a good deal for my constituents, and it's actually from my constituency experience that I became, as Bright House say, an avowed critic of some of what they're doing.
They say they carry out extensive affordability assessments. They say the customer knows what they'll end up paying.
I don't think that's true. You know, we heard from Zoe in the film, and the longer version of the film is on your website, who used to work at Bright House, and she said, and this is true of the rent-to-own sector generally, I think, she said, look, I don't feel proper affordability checks are being done. I felt I was selling to people who couldn't really afford to pay, and we talked to people again in the film who said they didn't really look at all of my finances, and I know you've had some responses already to the film of people saying, I've got into terrible trouble. I think a Facebook response of somebody who had bipolar disorder who said she was paying £68 a week to the rent-to-own sector. I think this is a sector that's been ignored for too long. I think the regulator needs to look at the practices, and we need to look at the rules that govern that sector.
Ryan Bourne, is Ed Miliband right?
Well, I think, to be fair to Ed Miliband, his VT was conflating 2 very different issues. Evidently, selling to people who have mental health issues or whatever, that should be governed by regulation, and it is, as the FCA acknowledged in the film. But the other issue is Ed seems to just be saying, because these products are expensive, he wants some sort of price cap, and therefore, you know, people won't have to pay so much. The problem with any of these price controls, and I know Ed's in the past advocated them for the rental sector and the energy sector and other sectors as well, is that if you constrain the amount of profits that companies are able to make, constrain their pricing, then actually they can provide less of it in the first place. And it's all very well saying, well, some people are paying lots of money for a washing machine or whatever, but if the alternative is to go to an expensive laundrette on a weekly basis, then actually you can see why some people choose to make this decision, even though, you know, it may be expensive overall.
Well, look, you're right, there need to be alternatives, Ryan, and there are social enterprises, something called Fair for You, which is selling at a fraction of the price that some of the rent-to-own sector is selling at. But I also think the customer needs protection. So you take the payday lending sector, which a few years ago was something that was a real scandal, and there are still problems there. The fact that a cap has been applied has, according to Citizens Advice, reduced by 50% the number of people who are coming to them saying that they have problems with payday lenders. So I'm not saying a price cap, for example, is a total panacea, totally solves the problem, but I just don't think interest rates of 70% seem fair or right, and I think the regulator does need to act.
Well, lots of other countries that have caps on credit costs on payday loans have many more people taking loans from very undesirable people where, you know, if you fail to pay, you actually get your kneecaps knocked out. So we have to be careful when we talk about the statistics on that, because the evidence from other countries is pretty clear on that. But look, a lot of these companies are actually taking quite a risk when they sell these products. I had a look at some of the academic evidence on this, and the skipping rate for payments on these types of, the purchases of these types of products is about double the normal retail rate. And lots of, you know, the payments are uncertain, lots of people fail to pay on time, as I said. So when you take into consideration that risk, there has to be some sort of payoff for that. Now, I'm not pretending that these products are right for everybody, but I just think this idea that you can just crudely cap the cost is a very naive way of dealing with the problem.
I mean, look, I think part of the reason why people are having trouble paying it back is because they're selling to people who can't afford it. I think it is also, though, pausing on this issue of learning disabilities, because I think this is something that, you know, thanks to your programme, Victoria, we kind of discovered in the course of the investigation about people who are in the most vulnerable circumstances being sold to. Now, I think 2 things need to happen. The FCA needs to look at the practices and whether these companies are actually following the guidelines of the FCA, the regulator, but I also think those guidelines need to be tightened up.
Well, it says if they believe the customer isn't able to understand the nature of the agreement, then the firm needs to make an assessment about whether it's appropriate to lend. I mean, you say that's not clear enough. That's clear.
Well, look, we've waded through the detailed guidance. I personally think companies like Bright House need to be investigated for the way they're selling to people with vulnerabilities, but I think it may be necessary for the FCA to tighten up their guidance further.
OK. Let me read you some comments from people watching around the country. This email from Fusion. Thank you for the piece this morning presented by Ed Miliband. Hopefully it will go some way to put an end to the exploitation of the weaker and more vulnerable people amongst us. Louise says, I've said for a long time that rent-to-own companies should have something in place to help protect the most vulnerable, especially people with mental health conditions. Mark, I find it disgusting the amount of interest they charge. If the government helped the poorest people, perhaps by providing government-backed loans, it would do more than help the people that it's undermining at the moment. Jason, great to see you investigating rent-to-own companies. They're clearly taking advantage of some people. David says, I'm an ex-user of a rent-to-own company. They pressure you into adding further goods and services with no thought for what you can afford. And Tony just watched Ed Miliband present a segment about Bright House. He did a really good job. New career, question mark.